Silverstein. Thank you so much. My name is Ren Silverstein. I'm the community manager at Haggadot.com, of which High Holidays at Home is a project. And I am joined today by my colleague, Rebecca Missel, who is the director of partnerships and content. And she'll be running tech for us today. And of course, we're joined by Sarah Chandler and Annie Cohen, who are here to present these amazing ancestral techniques to you today. We'll be going on kind of a time traveling adventure through Eastern Europe to reconnect with often forgotten, reclaimed folk traditions. That's going to be super exciting, and I'm going to introduce them with more detail in a bit. So yeah, as I said, we're the folks behind Haggadot.com. So Haggadot.com invites every Jew, regardless of their background, to find a place for themselves in the Passover story. And, you know, in any story, more Jewishly speaking, more broadly speaking, so that they may create more meaningful, more personal, more connective seders and or rituals more broadly. Our easy-to-use bookmaking technology, which if you're familiar with Haggadot.com, is pretty much the same kind of deal. You'll be right at home on High Holidays at Home. Sorry for the pun. You'll find featured booklets that are basically ready to print if you'd like to engage in ritual content. You can also feel free to create your own and even invite folks to your own personal gatherings, all on the same platform that you also, use to RSVP to this very event. So it's all free, and you can, feel free to, engage in that content as you wish. Haggadah.com and HighHolidaysAtHome.com are projects of custom and craft, Jewish rituals created by you. And we're a design lab for the Jewish community experimenting with technology and media and imagining new formats for engaging with ancient traditions, which is honestly like a really perfect transitional moment because we're going to be doing just that. But before I transition to that, I just want to add that we're a 501c3, and so we really rely on community donations from folks like you to keep our programs going and to keep things accessible from everyone who wants to use our material and our ritual and our content. So, all right. Let me introduce our speakers more formally. So first we have Sarah Chandler, who is a Brooklyn-based Jewish educator, artist, activist, healer, and poet. She teaches, writes, and consults on issues related to Judaism, earth-based spiritual practice, respectful workplaces, mindfulness, and farming. An ordained Kohenet with the Hebrew Priestess Institute and a trainer for Talmud, Stand Up. She is also an advanced student of Kabbalistic dreamwork at the School of Images. Annie Cohen is a second-year PhD student in modern Jewish studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and a Kohenet in training. She is originally from the UK, where she completed a BA and Master's in History. Her current research focuses on the history of the Eastern European Jewish left. All right, it's such a pleasure to have you. I'm going to pass it over to you two.
Thank you so much, Rin. Hi, everyone. So great to be with all of you. Great to have my mom here and some other people I know from Kohenet. And also people watching this in the future. Time travel is possible. We're going to go back, and some of you are now watching this in the future. Amazing. And we have a lot to cover today. We're going to spend about the first 20 minutes giving you some background on these rituals, and then we're going to actually be doing some writing together. And I'm really thrilled to be presenting here with my colleague, Annie. So here is our little slideshow. And we are also here in partnership both with High Holidays at Home and also Shamir Collective, our little organization whose mission is to promote the work of women, queer people, and anyone whose art is on the margins and ritual is on the margins. So we're really thrilled to be part of this event today. This is the overview of what we're going to be doing between now and about less than an hour from now. We're going to give you some ritual context and history around soul candles. We're going to explain the writing of techinas and what those are and why we should all still be doing it, no matter what century we live in or what country we live in or what gender we are. We're going to actually write our own techinas, and then there'll be some time at the end if you would like to share yours. And we'll also have some time for Q&A from me and Annie. All right, I'm going to pass it over to you, Annie.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone. It's so great to see you all. I'm kind of obsessed with these rituals, so it's always really exciting that people want to learn them or even do them. And we're going to be focusing today on the prayers, or the requests that people used to say when doing these things. But I want to just give a little bit of background of what these prayers usually went with. So in traditional Eastern European Jewish life, they had quite a different relationship with the dead than most of us have today in the Western world, where we're very used to memorializing the dead, but they really spoke to them. Like, they were still very much a part of their world, and they were a part of their connection to God. So the dead are closer to God, but they understand us in a way that maybe God can't. They were people alive on this earth. And so they can really help us. And it was a very normal thing to ask the ancestors for help. And the cemetery was an important place in that. The cemetery where they were buried was kind of thought of as the place where, like, you can get the best connection, you know, like you get the most, like, cell phone bars if you're trying to call the dead when you're standing in a cemetery. And especially the month of Elul that we're in now, where, you know, we're coming up to the high holidays, God is kind of watching us more closely. This was a very important time to talk to the dead, and people really went to the cemetery to do this. People ate cakes there. It was like this like social place in the cemetery. And a ritual that was practiced, especially in Elul, was the ritual of Feldmessen, which it's a euphemistic word for measuring the cemetery. And there were professional women in many, many shtetls in Eastern Europe who would be paid to do this. And in Elul, they would usually measure the entire cemetery, the entire perimeter. Sometimes they would measure just one grave, but that was usually throughout the year for a kind of more personal thing. And the thread that they'd used, they would then use to make these soul candles. And what we're going to be looking at is the prayers that they said when they made these candles, which we think can also be used without this ritual. It can be used with it or without it. And I write about this on a blog. So we're going to put some links in the chat if anyone wants to know more about the actual, or try out the practice of grave or cemetery measuring. This is a picture of some of the women who used to do this in South Russia. This is from 1906. This is probably in Ukraine, but I don't know the exact name of the place. You can see they're walking with string, and the title that they had was Feldmesterin, which literally in Yiddish just means a cemetery measuring woman. And Sarah and I are going to be playing being Feldmesterins in Mount Carmel Cemetery on Sunday. So we're going to be popping different links in the chat about that. But today the focus is really going to be on the art of spontaneous prayer, communication with ancestors, which you can do with or without. Can you please pronounce? Yes, Feldmesten is the verb, the act of measuring the cemetery, and a Feldmesterin was a cemetery measuring woman, the title. Oh, thank you, Ren, for posting that in the chat. And I started translating sources about this for other people in the Kohenet community. I never actually planned to do it. I did it for the first time here in my background. I don't know if you can see it's a cemetery because it's so tiny and kind of falling apart. But this is the cemetery of Kretinga in Lithuania, which is the shtetl that my family, or some of my family, came from. And when I went there to visit, I was so overwhelmed by the extent to which the Jewish life had disappeared and the cemetery was overgrown and neglected. And I didn't know what to do. And I decided I'm just going to measure the cemetery. And I did it. And it felt really good and like the right thing to do. And I really feel that communicating, talking to ancestors is a very healthy thing to do, whatever we think about it, you know, psychologically healthy, spiritually healthy, however you want to think about it. So then, Sarah, if you want to share the next slide, when I was teaching Yiddish at Yiddish Summer Weimar in Germany last summer, 2021, I taught some of the texts, the Yiddish text about this, and I asked the students, do you want to do it? And we went and we did. We measured this Jewish cemetery in Weimar that, again, looks like, you know, is not visited very often. And then when I moved here to Brooklyn, I brought the thread with me, and we, Shamira and I and some others, gathered in Prospect Park. Usually this would be done in the home. These were all, other than the actual measuring, these were all very home-based rituals. We did it outside because lots of people and COVID safety. So this is us kind of getting out the thread and measuring the candles. And you can just click through the next slides for interest. And we read some of the prayers as well.
So this here, we're also making the candles in this one.
Yeah, and this is us kind of rolling the thread in wax. Yeah, and we play with this ritual, usually on Erev Yom Kippur, when the candles were lit, they would make two very big candles. We made lots of little ones because big candles can kind of, I didn't want to burn down my my apartment in New York, having just moved into it. But we all tried to light them at the same time. So there's lots of different things that you can do with this. And we're going to give you different examples. I think Sarah is now going to talk a bit about some of the things you've done with this ritual.
Yeah, thanks. So I also learned about this for the first time from Annie through Kohenet, the Hebrew Priestess Institute, and also my teacher, Rabbi Noam Lerman, taught a class about Tichinis, these petitionary supplication prayers in Yiddish that I got to learn during the pandemic. And last November, when we had the unveiling for my grandmother's grave, I brought some string and I brought some of the prayers that I learned from Annie, and we measured their grave here. So this is me with my family. This is my sister last November. And then this is a few days later, or maybe even the same day, making candles with my family that I then used as Hanukkah candles. So using the string and then also, again, saying the prayers. Like Annie said, we're not just thinking about it or studying it or imagining that people once did this interesting grave measuring, but we're actually doing it. This is actually from last Friday. Annie and I went to Mount Carmel Cemetery, where there's a lot of huge Jewish cemetery, and we were starting to measure it so that we would estimate the size of it so that we can actually do the measuring ritual this coming Sunday. If you're near New York City, please join us. And if not, stay tuned on this webinar because you can still get the resources to go to a cemetery near you. This is us next to Shalom Aleichem's grave, very important Yiddish writer, and his wife buried right here. So it's been really powerful, and for us, part of what's powerful is that it's an embodied Jewish ritual, authentic Jewish ritual, and with all these Yiddish prayers. But really, what's powerful for it, and what we really want to bring to all of you today, is this role of tichinis, or supplication prayers. And this idea that it's not just that these women would sit in the cemetery and measure and make candles, and also not just that my last name is Chandler, candle maker, so I'm also drawn to it for that reason, but actually that a huge part of this is actually about spontaneous prayer. And on the one hand, and I feel like I was always told, well, why do women have spontaneous prayer? Shouldn't they, be able to do the full Hebrew prayers like the men? And, because in a lot of cases, women didn't know Hebrew, they didn't read Hebrew, and the idea of doing spontaneous prayer in Yiddish, which was their vernacular, was something that was very empowering for them. And it's not lost on me that here is a biblical scholar and a Yiddish scholar and a historian and a Kohenet coming on a webinar to say to all of you, whatever gender you are, whatever age you are, no matter if you know Hebrew or Yiddish or there's another language that's your vernacular, we want you to feel empowered to take on spontaneous prayer. And that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of our session today. We call this a techina. If you know the Hebrew word tachanun, it's about supplication. It's a form of prayer that became popular in Ashkenazi Jewish culture, especially amongst women, for the reasons we just mentioned. Sometimes they were written down, but they're really a form of spontaneous prayer, often in the home setting, which makes it a good match for this high holidays at home. And these actually were these prayers that were accessible to everyone and became a central form of devotion for women. And so today we're really inviting everyone here to embrace the Techina and empower ourselves just like these women did. And if you want to hear more about Techinas, we're going to put a bunch of links in the chat, but one of the things is the Azazel chapbook, which is how to do Yom Kippur spiritual practice at home, something that Shamir Collective came out with a couple of years ago. When I learned about Techinas from my teacher, Rabbi Noam Lerman, they actually made this beautiful list. It's a lot of words, but essentially of a kind of like top 10 most common ways to start a spontaneous prayer. Often if we say to someone, okay, now go pray spontaneously, you're like, health, please, I think, anyone listening? And, a lot of us raised in Western culture might not feel that comfortable. So there's this beautiful list. We're going to link to it in the chat for you. But just to give you an idea, again, it's different than a Siddur, where it's like, here's the Jewish prayer book, here's the words you have to say them this way, say them in this order, say them in Hebrew. And the fact that people were doing it in Yiddish is not to say that we need to do it in Yiddish, but it's that people felt called and comfortable saying these prayers in their vernacular. So some of these words, even if you're not a Yiddish speaker, Ribon ha'olamim, you might recognize sovereign of the worlds, or just, I thank you, God, here's the thing I need. So we're going to send you a link to this longer one, but just to give you an idea about that. And now I pass the mic back to Annie to give some more examples of techinas that were written out, and also one that she wrote.
Thank you. So yeah, we're going to look at the techinas at creating our own versions of the techinas that, again, mostly women used to say while they were making these candles. And the techinas that they said while they were making the candles are very similar to the ones they said when they were measuring the graves, which we have fewer examples of. But this practice of making candles for Yom Kippur, sorry, I always want to pronounce it the Yiddish way, was so common. And we know that because there were books of techinas. They were spontaneous, but people wrote them down as a kind of guide, the way a lot of prayer is. And these are in the most common books. So we know that this was really practiced. And there are so many stories of women gathering together in the home and doing this before Yom Kippur. And these techinas really call in the ancestors. And something I found so interesting about doing this with people and trying to do it myself is finding how much our instinct, or my own instinct, is always to memorialize them. Like it's about, they're there and we're praising them but this is about actually, you're there, I have something you don't have. I'm still in this world. I can do something for you, but you can also do something for me. And it's a relationship. So if we go back to the techina, this is just one example of this very common techina said when making candles for Yom Kippur. You can say, as they dipped the thread in wax to make the wick, they would name ancestors. So you see here we have Abraham, we have Sarah, and we say the virtues that those ancestors possessed. So Abraham was personally rescued by God, and purified from sin through a difficult experience. So let us also be purified. So by bringing in this ancestor and a specific quality they had, we can ask them to lend us that quality, to help us with that. Can you click through to the next one, Sarah? We're not going to read the whole thing, but we can share a link to it again on my blog, or at least we're not going to read it out loud because we want to get onto writing. You can see here one is really interesting. She talks about Yitzchak, Isaac, and how Isaac was almost sacrificed and how terrifying that was for his mother. Or maybe that quote isn't here, but it's further on. But she mentions this fear of having children kidnapped. And this was something that used to happen in the 19th century. Children were kidnapped and sent, Jewish boys were sent to the Tsarist army. So in this version, you add your own thing. So now, you know, we're still living through a time of pandemic. We might want to think of an ancestor who survived a pandemic or who was a healer, for example. Or you can think of really personal things in your own life. If you're struggling financially, you can think of an ancestor who went through the same struggle and came through. So that's the kind of idea. And Sarah, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. And this is just an example of one that I wrote for Kohenet, for the Kohenet services during the lockdown phase of COVID, when we were all completely online, that I wrote just with female feminine ancestors that the ones who are often forgotten. Because often the tchinas, like the tefillas, will mostly name men. They often name women too, but I wanted to kind of think about forgotten ancestors and their virtues during this time. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of talk you through, with prompts, writing of our own spontaneous prayers like this, and not just with ancestors from Tanakh, from the Old Testament, from the Torah, but also with people we can connect to. And we know that when they said these tchinas, like these were the bits that were written down with the ancient ancestors, but it was also traditional for the women who made the candles to name their own lost loved ones. So you would call in ancient ancestors who you read about, who you knew about, who you know have a special relationship with God, but you'd also call in those who had a special relationship with you. And we're going to kind of talk you through now this process of thinking about the things that we need and which ancestors can help us this year.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Annie. And like I said, these longer ones we're going to put in the chat. We have links to them in Annie's blog if you want to read them, either for to help you with your writing or later on. We're going to write some shorter ones. Rin's going to put in the chat 2 links. And this is a worksheet that's going to help you write your own techinas right now during this webinar. You're going to start writing. You might have already started thinking to yourself of specific people you want to call on. Some folks are going to prefer the Google Doc, so that's option 1. As soon as you click that link, it's going to say, do you want to make a copy? And it'll make a copy and it'll be editable. You will need to be signed into Google Docs for that to work. So if you're not super into Google Docs or multi-screens, multi-windows, you're going to want to go with option 2. Just click the just view and then you can do your writing on a old-fashioned piece of paper. And we're going to take you through all the parts of the worksheet. So if you'd rather just do it as we're going and not click anything, we're going to give you all the same information. I love a good worksheet. Who doesn't love a good, graphic organizer for education? All right, here we go. We have those links in the chat. Thank you so much, Rin. And Rebecca's reminding us all the links will be sent in the follow-up email. Brilliant. All right, here we go. So this is what you're going to do to write your Tahina. And again, some of you are watching this, maybe you're multitasking, maybe you're thinking like, oh, I'll rewatch it later. It's totally fine. But if you have a pen, if you have a minute, we really want to encourage you to try to write one. We're going to give you a full 10 minutes to work independently, and we'll also be available for questions. Okay, so step one, you're going to think to yourself, what blessings do I want to call in this year? We're in Elul, we're in the last month of the year. It's about to be Rosh Hashanah later this month. And here's some that I thought of: calm, joy, abundance, financial stability, balance. I'm constantly praying for balance, just keeps coming back as an important one. So maybe flow, anything you can, that's where we left some blank ones. What are you calling in? And so we're going to actually start. Some people are writing in the chat. That's great. Someone wrote health. We're going to think of 3 things that you're calling in before you even start thinking of the ancestors. So again, if we go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in and say this can be super specific if you want it to. Sometimes when I read, trainers that people remember people saying, they're like super specific, and it can also be something that you don't want. It can be a blessing for protection from something that you don't want to happen. Thank
you. All right. So you're going to have time to work on this piece. So I'm going through all the steps, and then we're going to have time. So first thing is, what are the blessings you want to call in? We recommend to choose 3. If you only have 2, if you have 4, that's fine too. And then Annie's going to do this slide.
So we've thought of kind of 3 categories maybe. If you feel much closer, if you have 3 people in your family or, who you have loved, who have moved on, and you want to call on them, that's fine. These are the 3 categories we're suggesting as you think of one ancient, biblical, or maybe a mythical character, someone that you know of, but who lived in this world at a very different time than we did. And I think that by calling on that, yes, we can call on someone from the Torah, someone that we're really familiar with through Jewish religion, religious life, but it's also just, a human being who experienced being a human at a very, very different time of history is something to think about here. And then maybe a more recent notable personality, maybe someone from outside the Jewish world, maybe someone in it, someone that you admire, someone that you feel could help you. I would encourage you on this to not call on people, to call on ancestors who you feel are strong. So for example, I might call on a family member who is deceased, who I feel my grandmother died at a very old age. She was a very strong person. I feel like she had as easy a transition as can be. Whereas I've had other people, who maybe died more recently and had a much more difficult death that I maybe wouldn't call on them right now, that it's not the time. So it's kind of having a sense as well of like, not just the people that we loved the most, that we admired the most, but the people that we think can actually help us. It's about them helping us. So one ancient, mythical, one more recent, famous, well-known, and one, so we're encouraging you to pick, sorry if I wasn't clear, we're encouraging you to pick 3 ancestors and 3 blessings. And our suggestion is 1 from each of these categories. But if you want to pick all 3 family members or all, you can, the whole idea is that this is spontaneous and it's as you feel is right. But this is our suggestion: 1 ancient, 1 more recent, and 1 family.
And actually, I'll just skip to this slide because this is my sample, because I think it'll help make sense. So So for example, I'll do the first part, I'm calling in joy, abundance, and love. And so then I wrote out in my little worksheet, joy, abundance, and love. And then I put next to it which ancestor represents that blessing or quality. So for joy, I picked Deborah the prophet. For abundance, I picked Patricia Monaghan, who was a author of Celtic mythology, whose book about Ireland really inspired me. And for love, I picked my grandma Gert, who died in 2019, because she represents love for me. And so before I even write the Tehina, I'm making a list of the blessings and then having an ancestor who corresponds. So 3 blessings, 3 ancestors. Again, if you want to do 2, great. If you want to do 1, 4, 17, it's available to you. Okay, so that's choosing the ancestors. And then I think Annie's also doing this slide for writing it.
So we're also inviting you to think of your own God language or your preferred way of speaking with the divine, because the Trina usually you're speaking to God. Interestingly, when they were in the cemetery, they would often speak directly to the ancestors, but making the candles, you're speaking to God or to the source of life or to the great unknown, whatever you feel most connected to. And then you're naming the merits of the ancestors. You're reminding God, or Shekhinah, or whoever, whatever, that you are connected to these ancestors. You're saying, remember this person, they're helping me, and it's helping you have a connection with the divine through them. So these are just some suggestions. The other lovely thing about Techinas is they're extremely intimate. Really, you talk to God and to the ancestors as if you are talking to really good friends. And that's quite beautiful. So we're encouraging that. And now we're going to give you some time to write.
We have one more slide. I think actually you were going to do this slide also.
Yeah. Well, these are some suggestions. I think maybe we can give time to write first, because these are suggestions of when you might say it.
Love that.
So let's do that now and then come back.
All right, we're gonna pause speaking to give folks time to write. We'll come back at 44. Let's come back at 44 past the hour. And if as you're writing or brainstorming, you have a technical question or you want a suggestion like, what's a biblical character who represents this quality? You can just unmute or you can message me or Annie and we'll try to help you. So there's a question, ancestors who we can call on to dismantle walls. And again, it's not only, you don't have to only call on female ancestors. You can call on all kinds of different ones. And again, they could be biblical or Talmudic. But yeah, I love the idea of Samson or Joshua or someone associated with them. Judith is really great. All right, so wherever you are, write yourself 1 or 2 more notes. And we're gonna come back to one big group. And if you're not done, that's okay. If people want to share fragments, that's okay. I'm gonna read mine, and then anyone who wants to share can share, and then we're gonna wrap it up. All right. So when you share, you don't have to share all the pieces. I'm just showing you this example. I started with calling in joy, abundance, and love, and then this is my Tehina. May it be your will, as I am before you, Shekhinah, my God and God of my ancestors, Bring me joy in the coming year in the name of Devorah the prophet, abundance through the line of Patricia, and love from my grandma Gert. So there's a sample, and folks who want to type in the chat can, or you can raise your hand, and we'd love to hear a couple people who are feeling open to sharing, which is optional. Yes, go for it, Molly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly, for those who don't know me. This is really incredible and very timely because I'm working with someone here on the Sonoran Desert to do this. And I felt really lost, even though I knew, Annie, you've been studying this, and Shamira, you've also been engaged with this work. And I didn't know how to reach out. So this feels very timely. And so the Tehina that I wrote is towards this ritual. I don't know if I'll use it in the ritual itself, but I think it was just helpful to drop me into why this and why here. And what we're doing is the vision is to measure the cemetery. There's a cemetery that is 100 feet, maybe, I don't know, distance away from the border wall between the US and Mexico. And it's a Jewish cemetery, and it was the first cemetery in Arizona, the first Jewish cemetery in Arizona. So yeah, there's a lot of threads. I'll read it now. Fierce swirl that brings in the monsoons. Shekhinah, Havaya. I call on you with the strength, perseverance, and discernment of our ancestors. May the knowing of Miriam, love that, break down our physical and emotional walls of separation and isolation. Bell hooks, may your presence imbue us with the unmovable love needed to repair and create sustainable roads towards liberation that are paved with creatively. And Leah Anderson, I hold you in reverence as I ask for the collective clarity to separate out the threads of despair and disintegration, and to weave in the threads that quilt us with deep trust of cohesion.
Amen. Thank you, Molly. Wow. And we have a few more minutes, and the other folks want to share. And if folks, maybe you didn't finish writing something, but you just want to reflect on the experience of writing, we'd also be happy to hear from you. So you can raise your hand, and Cece, we see your question. We'll come back to it in a minute. Go ahead, Alana, and then Cece.
Great. I really enjoyed this. It was such a wonderful thing to engage with, and I understood what Annie was saying about having a relationship rather than memorializing our ancestors. Boy, was that difficult to switch up, and in only 9 minutes. So I loved Molly's. Mine is much more based on the form because I didn't have the expansiveness. But this is mine as in another example. Source of life, bring me clarity in the coming year in the name of Miriam, the prophetess, and the clarity of her water. Physical strength as a student of Joseph Pilates, and generous presence and lack of distraction from my bubby Golda Brief.
Beautiful. Thank you. I love that you brought in Joseph Pilates.
Amazing.
For us.
Amazing. We'll pass the mic to Cece, and then we'll take one or two more, and then we're gonna have any Q&A and wrap up.
Hi, I think a lot more slowly than some of you in the room, but I found having a formula really, really helpful. And so thank you for some of the practical tips. I've read a little bit, Annie, of the writings that you've shared on your website, and the component of like the bricks and mortar of how to do some of this stuff was really helpful. So thank you for that. And I only got as far as addressing God. And so I'll read you the little bit that I have, and then we'll continue. Source of life, holy shapeshifter, creator of rose gardens, and opener of gates. That's where I started.
Amazing. Barbara, I see your hand. Barbara Kraus.
Hi. Dear Shekhinah, the female essence of life, energy, and flow, we ask you through Miriam, our ancestor, who was prayed for and healed long ago, to give me a complete healing, as has been prayed for and desired by my loved ones and acquaintances who have stood by me and held me up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, and I'm seeing some people right in the chat, oh, Barbara, did you want to add something?
No, I just hit the wrong thing. I want to lower it, and somehow I gave myself a thumbs up.
It's all good. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Thank you so much, everyone who shared. And yeah, some of us are slow writers, and you can take this worksheet with you. You can write more than one. And for some of us, the pressure to kind of do it spontaneously and not kind of plan it out in advance actually helps us write it faster. And for some of us, the time, like you have 10 minutes to write, actually does help us write it. So, we're all different. I do really recommend trying to do it with family if that sounds something that is compelling or comfortable to you. And I also want to remind folks that you do not have to do this in a cemetery. There is, if you're going to a cemetery in Elul, if you live near your ancestors, great. We really encourage it. We're going to say a little bit more about cemeteries and thread in a moment. But for example, we made a guide at High Holidays at Home where you can use the thread to just measure ancestral objects. That's what I did during COVID times when I couldn't get to a cemetery. I measured some art in my apartment that had been my grandma's. And I have to tell you, it was really, really powerful. I really felt connected to her in some ways more than visiting her grave, because this is art that she looked at every single day.
Should we show that last slide that has a few suggestions on it?
Sure. Here we go. Yes, go ahead, Annie.
So this, and it's not breaking with, these rituals were so fluid and they were done differently in different places, were very intuitive. So it's not breaking with tradition either, to kind of figure out what works now for us. On Yom Kippur, like I said, people used to make these huge candles, and Sarah and I are going to attempt to do that this year. So if you're interested in knowing more, we've got that event coming up, and we can share some more resources. They're all going to be on my blog. But there are lots of other simpler things that we can do. Sometimes during the year, cemeteries would be measured not to make candles, but to make even clothing. People used to measure graves sometimes and use the string to make like protective bands. So you could also do that on Elul. You could also just light a candle. I think the essence of what we were trying to share here, and some of you have mentioned it, and it's a difficult thing to get used to, is this thing about talking to the ancestors directly, or talking to God, but bringing the ancestors in. Like, this is really what it's about. And it's beautiful, Cece, that you mentioned gates, because that's what it is. It's like opening the gate between them and us, but also like, we don't want anyone to cross over it. Like, they're there, we're here, but we're communicating with them. So these prayers, the important thing, I think, is the words the kavanah, the intention. The ritual aspect should be whatever feels right to you. So you could make candles, just make candles without measuring anything, or you could measure objects or graves. You could just light candles. You could say this while lighting candles on Erev Yom Kippur. We've even suggested you could say this during the silent Amidah prayer in shul, which is something a lot of people, I think, find difficult. It's something I've always found quite difficult. Like, I don't really know what to do when it comes to kind of personal silent prayer. And these are building blocks that you could do it when tying, you could do it when tying string around your wrist or in your home. There's lots of options.
Thank you, Annie.
You could even do it when placing a rock on a grave, which is a very common practice. Sorry, the connection broke a little bit.
That's okay. We're gonna thank you so much. We're gonna pass the mic back to our folks, Rebecca and Rin.
Thanks so much. Wow. I realize we still have a few questions in the chat, and I'm so sorry that we didn't get to all of them. Sarah has so generously put both her and Annie's contact information in the chat, so feel free to follow up with them about those questions. So there's some really wonderful questions in there. Yeah, thank you so much again, Sarah and Annie. That was so beautiful. I feel like we've all really learned a lot. I'm going to share my screen in a second once again. Give me one moment to do that. Okay. All right. So, okay. So thanks for coming, everyone, once again. I'd just like to flag a couple of upcoming events on our end. First, we have Hosting with Hospitality, these high holidays with our partners at One Table. That's on Wednesday, September 14th, where you can learn all about how to make your high holidays gathering super meaningful with our events platform and book clip making technology. Then on Monday, the 19th, we have Teshuva, Return to Your Inner Creativity, which is led by me, which will be kind of a journey through your inner inherent creative instinct towards returning to yourself for the new year. And lastly, on Thursday, September 22nd, we're so excited to have our partners at Shomer Collective with Rabbi Melanie Levav to guide us through writing Yom Kippur confessions to enter into the new year. Please feel free to go to highholidaysathome.com/events to create your own events. I'll put that in the chat in just a moment. And also feel free to email us with any questions at info@haggadot.com. And I will stop sharing so that I can put this in the chat. One moment, please. All right. There you go. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again, it's been such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for
so
coming.
much. Thanks so much, Rin and Rebecca.